7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty, and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation, or any nation so conceived and so dedicated, can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here, have consecrated it, far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note, nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. The Gettysburg Address, delivered by President Abraham Lincoln on November 19, 1863, during the American Civil War, is one of the most iconic speeches in history. Although the speech itself was only about 272 words long, its historical, rhetorical, and symbolic weight is immense. Historical context. The nation at war. The Gettysburg Address came at a pivotal point in the American Civil War, a conflict fought from 1861 to 1865 between the Union, the North, and the Confederacy, the South. The war arose primarily over the expansion of slavery and the rights of states versus the power of the federal government. By 1863, the war had claimed tens of thousands of lives, and morale was deeply shaken on both sides. The Battle of Gettysburg, fought from July 1st to 3rd, 1863, marked a turning point in the war. Union forces under General George G. Meade repelled the Confederate Army led by General Robert E. Lee. The battle resulted in over 50,000 casualties, making it one of the bloodiest encounters in American history. In the wake of this devastation, a cemetery was commissioned to honor the fallen Union soldiers. Lincoln was not the main speaker at the dedication. That role fell to Edward Everett, a renowned orator and former Secretary of State, who spoke for over 2 hours. Lincoln's speech lasted barely 2 minutes, but it became the most remembered and revered speech of the event, and ultimately of his presidency. The structure and content of the speech. Lincoln's Gettysburg Address is often studied for its rhetorical brilliance. The speech is tightly structured, moving from the past, through the present, and into the future. Opening. A reflection on founding principles. 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty, and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. With this opening line, Lincoln immediately draws attention to the Declaration of Independence, signed 87 years earlier in 1776, not the Constitution. This distinction is crucial. The Constitution, at its creation, permitted slavery, while the Declaration articulated the more aspirational principle of human equality. Present struggle and sacrifice. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation, or any nation so conceived and so dedicated, can long endure. Here, Lincoln identifies the war as a trial of the nation's commitment to its founding ideals. This is not just a military struggle, but a philosophical and moral one. Can a government of the people, by the people, for the people survive internal division? We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. Lincoln turns attention to the immediate purpose, honoring the dead. However, he humbly deflects attention from the living ceremonial gestures to the sacrifice of the soldiers, claiming, "But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground." This is one of the most powerful moments of the speech. Lincoln implies that the soldiers' actions have already consecrated the ground more profoundly than any speech or ceremony could. The repetition of "we cannot" emphasizes the insufficiency of words in the face of real sacrifice. Call to action and the future. It is for us the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. The tone shifts from mourning to resolve. Lincoln urges the audience not to be passive observers, but to commit themselves to the cause for which the soldiers died, the preservation of the nation and the advancement of freedom. That this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. This closing line is one of the most quoted in American rhetoric. Lincoln does more than honor the dead. He redefines the war as a moment of rebirth. The new birth of freedom suggests the end of slavery and a renewed commitment to equality. In doing so, Lincoln transforms a war for the Union into a crusade for a more perfect realization of democratic ideals. Themes and philosophical foundations. Several themes emerge from the Gettysburg Address that reflect both the specific historical moment and universal values. Equality and liberty. Lincoln ties the legitimacy of the America and government to the principle of equality. This reframing is revolutionary. By asserting that the war is about upholding this proposition, he places moral urgency at the heart of the conflict. National purpose. The speech redefines American identity. The United States is no longer just a collection of states. It is a nation unified by shared ideals. The survival of the Republic depends on the people's dedication to those ideals. Sacrifice and responsibility. Lincoln does not romanticize war. Rather, he acknowledges its toll. Yet, he insists that such sacrifice must not be in vain. The living have a duty to ensure that the principles for which others have died continue to thrive. Democratic resilience. By proclaiming that a government of the people, by the people, for the people must not perish, Lincoln affirms the enduring power and responsibility of democracy. His words echo through time as a defense of democratic governance, especially in times of crisis. Rhetorical style and power. Lincoln's speech is a masterpiece of conciseness and clarity. Using plain language and familiar rhythms, often derived from the Bible, he creates a solemn yet hopeful tone. He avoids assigning blame or indulging in divisive rhetoric. Instead, he elevates the occasion to a meditation on the meaning of democracy itself. The tripartite structure of the people, by the people, for the people, and use of parallelism provide a sense of rhythm and unity. The speech is devoid of personal pronouns like I or me, reflecting Lincoln's humility and focus on collective responsibility. Legacy and influence. The Gettysburg Address did not receive universal praise at the time. Some newspapers criticized its brevity or ideals. Yet over time, it came to symbolize the moral heart of the American Civil War and Lincoln's presidency. A speech that shaped a nation, though brief in form, the Gettysburg Address endures as a foundational text of American identity. Lincoln's words transformed a battlefield cemetery into hallowed ground, not only because of those who died there, but because of the ideals they represented.